This episode is brought to you by WeatherGuard Lightning Tech. At WeatherGuard, we support design engineers and make lightning protection easy. You're listening to the Struck Podcast. I'm Dan Blewett.
I'm Alan Hall.
And here on Struck, we talk about everything aviation, aerospace engineering, and lightning protection. All right, welcome back to the Struck Podcast. I'm your co-host, Dan Blewett. On today's show, we're going to catch up a little bit, talk about some good coronavirus news with quarantine-free flights from American to Italy. We'll talk a little bit about Airbus and Air France potentially standing trial over 2009 crash, and a potential partnership between RollsRoyce and Boeing. In our engineering segment, we'll talk about grounding today, as it kind of relates to some of the new Boeing 737 issues, which that plane remains embattled. And then lastly, a bunch of eVTOL news to catch up with, some really interesting stuff from Volocopter. We'll talk battery tech a little bit, Lilium, and Beta Technologies. So, Alan, how you doing, sir?
Hey, great, Dan. We're almost out of COVID in the United States. I know the mask mandates have been lifted recently or will be lifted at the end of the month. So that's a really good sign. I hope our friends, especially our friends in Europe and in India and South America, can get to this point relatively soon. I know there's still a lot of coronavirus going on around the world, and it's really serious in certain parts. So from the aviation community standpoint, it's a big problem. Travel is still going to be limited for the next several months easily. Yeah. Well, and so some of this reporting on American Airlines, they're offering customers flights quarantine-free from JFK to Milan and from JFK to Rome. So basically customers will have to provide proof of a negative COVID test and then also get a COVID test when they arrive. But after that, they can pretty much go about their merry way, which seems like a big sort of breaking of the seal. Because international travel has been a big no-no, right? It has been, but it's also really done a lot of damage to the economies that rely on vacationers and business travel. It's just been totally slammed for more than a year now. And it can't go on much longer without really having lasting consequences. And so it's good that at least where we can do it, we should be starting to open up some of these routes. Obviously, having the COVID test makes infinite sense. Having been vaccinated, I had my second vaccination over the weekend, and that was an experience. But if we can do more of that, your little 16 hours of sickness. Oh yeah, it was. Or no? It did. It really did. It really did. It felt like I was having the flu. Every part of my body was achy and tired. It was amazing how fast that reaction happened. But hey, I'm willing to go through that if I could travel again or travel more. I've already traveled quite a bit during COVID times, but it's you're always like super cautious about wherever you go, and rightly so. I mean, the vaccine is not going to prevent you from catching it necessarily, but it'll just knock the symptoms way down. And hopefully, as we get through the summertime, more of this type of travel will happen. Yeah, and interesting, I was reading an article earlier about the Yankees and how they had a little COVID outbreak recently. And it was kind of exploring that idea that, well, the vaccines are pretty effective, but even when they're not completely effective at preventing people from getting COVID, because obviously all of the Yankees players were, vaccinated. Long ago. Yeah. But 9 got it, and 7 were symptom-free. So that seems like a pretty good result, because I think that for a lot of us at the end of the day is just what everyone's worrying about. It's like, would you be that one person that really has lingering effects? And obviously a lot of people lost their lives. So that's good to know that even if you get it, it's just like a normal sickness, and not too bad where it's going to really, you could lose your life or be in the hospital or really have those long-term effects. That's the big thing. So Right. Yeah, and that's where it gets back to normal life. If it really was just like a bout of the common cold or just something moderate, then, that's humans have been dealing with that forever. But obviously it was not that for so long. It was pretty scary, especially when people are still dying as we learn more about it. Yeah, and I had traveled over the last week or so across the country on some business travel, and I was shocked at the number of people that were traveling. It was midweek in different stops along the way from West Coast to East Coast, and it was amazing at the number of people that were traveling, and the level of tension, you could feel it at the gate, was a lot. It's much less everywhere you were. Even the restaurants and things were starting to open up again in the walkways and in the taxiways. All that stuff was open that was closed for at least a year, starting to crack open again, and which is a good sign. But I always feel you could feel the panic last summer when you're traveling. It was very serious. It was really serious. Travelers, and everybody was minded their P's and Q's the whole time. And this last time, it was people going on vacation, clearly going on vacation, clearly going to, like, some people were going to Vegas to have a good time. So you just saw a lot more general activity. It wasn't like a needed travel time. So things have changed a good bit.
Gotcha.
The vaccines helped a lot.
All right, so moving on, I want to get your opinion here. Recent article about Airbus and Air France. They're potentially going to be ordered to stand trial in a criminal sense over a 2009 crash that 228 people lost their lives, specifically related to freezing of, was it pitot tubes or pitot probes? Are they interchangeable, Alan?
Interchangeable, pretty much today, yeah.
And so it sounds like they had icing issues, and it sounds like there were some service, bulletins or mandates to swap those out, but yet this issue still happened, and the plane, I guess, what is it? The nose got a little high during the flight, and they stalled
and crashed. Yeah,
fell out of
fell out of the sky.
I guess the big question is why a criminal complaint here rather than just a civil one?
Well, it has to be related to specific French or European law. And in the United States, I think this would never get this far. There would be settlements and signing of documents to prevent future lawsuits. But in this particular case, I think because everything's internal to France, right? So you got Airbus and you got Air France, and then you have a lot of French families. The flight was coming from Brazil to France. And pitot probes most likely iced over based on the data from the crash and all the reconstruction that happened. Airplane stalled, fell about 40,000 feet into the ocean. And no one could figure out for a while, like, what had happened. It's just so bizarre of an incident to have happened. The legal ramifications are odd in the sense that if you're trying to prove negligence, it's going to be hard to do that. Because the regulators allowed the pitos to be changed over a period of time. You can't, unless there's like something really, really severe happening, it's rare that a EASA, FAA, Transport Canada just grounds an airplane and says, you got to fix this, like FAA did with the 737. Those situations are very rare. Usually there's a time frame. If they have some sort of known issue and it's not catastrophic in nature, they'll let you make those changes over time because the airplanes need to be in service and all those kind of things. So there's an out for Air France and Airbus, which is that the regulators allow them to do this. And I'm sure that's what they're going to point to. Now, what happens in a French civil court, who the heck knows what's going to happen there? But if you're going to hold somebody culpable for that, then most likely it's going to be some engineer somewhere, unfortunately. And that's just a bad situation, because when you start going after engineers who are doing, at least theory, or doing the right thing, there's no intent to kill somebody, clearly, then you're assigning intent to kill somebody or to kill a couple hundred people. That gets hard to prove in a courtroom, realistically. But if they do find somebody guilty, every engineer that's working at Airbus or Air France is going to be totally tight about what they're going to sign off on forever, because it isn't like they were making a decision in a vacuum. They're making a decision with all kinds of people who knew about it. There are probably hundreds of people who knew about it, from the lowest mechanic to the highest people in the corporations knew about it. What do you do?
It's an interesting concept, because back in the day, and this was from, I can't remember which book I was reading, that if you built a bridge you would have to sleep under that bridge for a couple of days to essentially like have skin in the game.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think there's some merit to that. You know, if you built a house and it collapsed on the family that you built it for, you were going to be in serious trouble, like either imprisoned or maybe even killed. I mean, obviously this is a long time ago, but there's some merit to that, right? And we're not saying that you should be killed if, you know, by any stretch, but like there is some merit to having skin in the game. And like you said, if you know there's serious consequences to not thinking through one of these solutions that could cost people lives, you're going to think a lot harder about what's going on. But like you said, this is such a, in today's society, it seems like these are civil penalties, not criminal penalties for, you know, because like you said, if you're an engineer and you say, I have some concerns, and everyone else is like, oh, no, it's going to be fine. We've all checked it. We agree. And then it comes back to you. That seems really problematic, right? If it's a whole team signing off rather than just one person. Like if I just built you a house myself and it fell on your family, yeah, like this was on me, right? But if it's a whole team and all these big companies are really large with lots of checks and balances, then it just becomes a lot more difficult to point the finger at one person and assign criminal fault.
Right. Well, I think in this particular case, I think they noticed that the pitot probes didn't have the corresponding or proper amount of heat in certain high altitude icing situations, and it's all about how hot you can get those probes to keep ice off them. And the situation would be if there's always risk everywhere. If you saw that was a situation, would you raise it? Maybe, maybe not. You know, what the worst case situation is, you bury it, and all those airplanes were at risk instead of just the one.
Moving on, let's talk about Rolls-Royce and Boeing. So they're potentially holding discussions to start a new aircraft program, and it sounds like they want a mid-range jet. Alan, what feels like mid-range to you? So they said somewhere between the 737 and the 787. I mean, what market does that hit?
It hits a lot of U.S. markets, South American markets, European markets, Asian markets. It fits a lot of different areas. The curiosity is, like, what size is it going to be? How many passengers are we talking about? Because that's always been that weird spot. Like, what is between a 737 and like even a 757? Like a 757 has been gone for quite a while. Some are still in service, but there's that 777, 747 on the big end, 767 on the big end. And you got we used to have 727, 717 when that was around for that brief moment, 737. So slightly larger than 737. I guess the 787 doesn't really fill some of these roles like they thought it was going to. And an airplane kind of gets a persona after a while, and they get slotted as to where its useful market is, because the airlines figure it out pretty fast. So if there's a marketplace in there, slightly, is it a stretch 737? Is it a re-engine 737? Is it a Max Plus? Like, what is this thing? And nobody knows yet. But the thing about Boeing and new aircraft programs, that sometimes Boeing's doing things just to jerk the chain of Airbus or to jerk the chain of Embraer. And for whatever reason, there's a lot of sabotage, corporate sabotage going on all the time. And I wonder, how real is this thing? Because, I mean, you haven't heard much coming out of Boeing for quite a while in new designs, and you wouldn't think they have a lot of cash flow to go out and do something new. So you kind of wonder, how real is it? Is this another play to make Airbus flinch and do something like make it 380, or is it something real? Who knows? We'll have to just keep our ear to the ground and see how it progresses here.
All right, so moving on in our engineering segment today, let's talk about grounding. So Boeing has had some more issues with their 737 MAX. They basically have sort of uncovered a manufacturing issue where they weren't getting full metal-to-metal contact because of the way basically the manufacturing process of a hole being drilled. And it sounds like they had called initially for it to be like a layer of coating applied and then the holes drilled. And apparently that got reversed and impacted grounding. And now 60 of the aircraft out of the 200 that have returned to service are now grounded for this issue. So, Alan, let's talk a little bit about grounding in general. I mean, this is obviously something that it's not like a sexy topic, but it's a really important topic when it comes to airplane design.
Sure it is. I've heard differing reports. If you look at the different news sources, they say slightly different things, and I wonder if it's sort of a lost in translation thing between engineers and reporters. But it sounds like, at least in the one article that I read recently, it's a coating on some fasteners. What I mean fasteners is like rivets, things that attach structure to structure or boxes to structure. And in this particular case, it sounds like they changed the coating on some fasteners, and the emergency power distribution box wasn't grounded the way that it should have been. Well, that's a problem from a system safety standpoint, because you need that thing to go fly. And something as small as some coating, and it literally is less than 1,000th of an inch, most of those coatings, something like a coating on a fastener or a coating on a piece of metal can degrade the performance of the system, can lead to, seriously, it could lead to catastrophic results in theory. That's really, really serious. So if you're in a manufacturing scenario like Boeing is, or any of the aircraft manufacturers, Airbus has the same issue. When you've got thousands of parts, hundreds of thousands of parts, and you're talking about the finish on a couple of pieces of bracketry or rivets being changed for who knows what reason, bulk buys, engineer didn't realize, trying to save time, they put it as an alternate. Oh, there's 1,000 reasons why you get into the situation, but those little small changes can have bigger system impacts, and you need to have a system in place that engineers who know how that system works, electrically, mechanically, operationally, need to be involved in even some of the minor discussions and changes that happen on the manufacturing floor. So I think I got caught, most likely got caught because they were doing bonding checks and they had some come up bad, and then red flagged it, and engineers start coming down to the floor and figuring out what was going on. And it's not uncommon, because there's so many moving pieces and so many things happening simultaneously on an airplane build. It's an easy thing to occur. And Boeing took the reins on this basically away from the FAA, in a sense that they identified the issue, they identified the aircraft, they identified the repair, and they said, well, this is what we're doing. And the FAA just sort of said, well, okay, that sounds good. So the FAA didn't really have a lot of say in it, because Boeing had already developed the fix for it, which is a little bit unusual. Usually there's a little interplay between the FAA and, like, here's the situation, here's what's happening, here's the options we have, here's what we'd like to do, and there's an agreement. In this particular case, Boeing's like, we can't afford to have any more screw-ups. We're going to kill this problem right here, right now. And FAA, are you on board? And the answer is yes. So away they go. But simple things like, really simple things like coatings and paints and those sort of things seem irrelevant, but they have a big effect on system performance. They just do.
Yeah, and this article from the EE Times just highlights that Wall Street Journal had one reporting of what the issue was. Aviation Week had another, like you said, another report of it, and the Seattle Times had a different report that just sort of they weren't exactly sure, which was the right one. But like you said, it's a huge thing. I mean, and you do this all the time. I mean, engineers contact you about a Radome design, and they're asking you, it seems like a lot of nitpicky solutions, but they're not, right? They're saying, what size screw is this? What size, strap, or, like, why are all those details? I mean, especially on like a Radome, I mean, why does the size of a screw or a fastener that, creates the final electrical connection, why does that matter so much? I mean, is it just current, especially when you're dealing with like lightning strikes?
Yeah, I mean, it's how much energy a piece of metal can handle, and the bigger it is, the more likely to be able to handle a certain amount of energy. And even coatings will play into the lightning survivability of a particular kind of fastener. All those little details do play into it, and so you have to be very specific. We need to use this kind of fastener with this kind of coating, and it needs to be connected to this kind of bracket with, because if you don't, it may come apart in flight, and you may start losing pieces off the Radome, which never is good, especially if you suck them into an engine. So you really want to make sure that you've properly sized the pieces, one, and two, that the coatings are right, and that you have the proper electrical connection. If you do all those things right, you'll pass lightning tests, no sweat. It's just when you forget about a detail, and I've seen it happen many times where a company runs out of that particular fastener finish, and they're going to a test, they grab another fastener finish, shove it in there, it's the same size fastener. What's the problem? boom, a lightning test that blows the thing apart. Well, little tiny details do matter here, and that's why a lot of companies and engineers reach out and say, hey, to me, and say, what do I need? What specifically do I need? All the way down to fastener finishes and the size of the fasteners, and sometimes the material. Is it stainless steel, Crest, or is it regular steel, CAD plated, whatever? What works in this situation? And I usually have a list, but that is a common question, and all those little details matter. They always do. They always do.
All right, so in our EVTOL segment today, let's start with Volocopter. Alan, they've done a lot of really cool things. I've liked their design. I know you've liked their design a little bit.
Yeah.
They have a brand new one called Voloconnect, which is a longer range air taxi, potentially a 4-seater, very futuristic looking. I've always liked they seem to be like the Apple, like their design, color schemes and stuff like that of the EVTOL market. But this looks like a big change, and obviously a different market, which, I think we both expect that you're going to continue to see different iterations. Like everyone's had the same sort of let's do this, short range, but this one's a significantly longer range, bigger payload vehicle. So, I mean, what sticks out to you about the Voloconnect's, aesthetics and aerodynamics and just the design of it in general?
Well, the need for vertical takeoff and landing really drives a lot about the design. And if you go online and take a look at the aircraft design, it has a couple of booms essentially that tie structure together. So there's 2 long booms, and there's a bunch of motors and propellers on these booms that provide the vertical takeoff and landing aspect to it. So from a design standpoint, it seems functionally this will work, right? It's very similar to the beta design that's happening now. Those 2 aircraft are very similar in nature and the way they're structured. The penalty for the vertical takeoff and landings, but seems to be huge though, in the sense that you got these 2 big structural pieces which are heavy, and they're full of extra motors that you don't use for forward flight at all. So they're only used in very short spurts in the beginning and ending of flight. It makes you wonder if that weight cost trade-off is worth it. Is the vertical takeoff and landing that valuable that you want to eat that weight, cost, complexity aspect, or is short takeoff and landing a better option? Because there's a big discussion in the aviation community, like, if I had 200 feet of runway, is that enough? Maybe. That may be enough. And then the vertical, I don't need the vertical. So I get rid of hundreds of pounds of weight and complexity. I just need a 200-foot stretch of grass or asphalt to take off and on off. Maybe it's going to be a very, very interesting fight, I think, coming up, because some of the aircraft designs are eating that boom weight and motor weight, and some of the aircraft designs are basically incorporating a standard aircraft configuration without the extra structural components. So what they're doing to get the vertical takeoff is basically tilting the motors down to provide vertical thrust. So there's not extra structure there. And you got to think that that's a much cleaner, simpler design to basically tilt the motors and not add the boom weight. To me, Dan, I know I've been watching a little more and paying a little more attention to what the sale price of these aircraft are going to be. There seem to be honing in on the $4 to $5 million aircraft price per aircraft price, which seems extraordinarily high to me right now. That the competition in a lot of cases is probably a Sesto 206 or Beach Bonanza kind of thing, which are a lot less money. It's just a lot less money.
Yeah, well, and if you start getting to where they're not EVTOLs anymore, then you say, well, what about one of these other companies like Ampere that doesn't...
Yeah, or Buy Aerospace, right? It has a basic standard electric design, and Buy's going after the King Air market, on the twin market, is where they're headed. But that's a really good point. Like, how much vertical do you need? And maybe in spots of Europe, London, I think, Los Angeles, New York, probably. Houston, United States, maybe Chicago. Okay. But after that, most of the American cities are not that dense where there's not dozens of runways around them, particularly in the Midwest. There's all kinds of runways all over the place. You actually open a chart and look, there's runways all over the place. So do you need that vertical aspect? And the market's going to determine that, but you'd hate to see hundreds of millions of dollars invested in something which doesn't produce a useful aircraft or a sustainable company at the end. That's the worry.
Yeah, because the eVTOL aspect of it, that vertical takeoff and landing, that seems to be the big thing that no other like Ampere can't do, but they can do a lot of other things well. Just like with Tesla, they're going to be suddenly competing with a lot of similar electric cars. What's Tesla's standout feature after that, or is it just the fact that they're first to market and they have some, the premium veneer and brand awareness and brand
user interface
value? Yeah, so even then, they're going to be closer to, someone's going to say, well, why spend $75,000 on a Tesla when I could spend $45,000 on a pretty nice looking Volkswagen platform or a Chevy, right? They're just going to get to that point. Whereas if you lose the eVTOL thing here, now you're competing with all the other, like you said, like Buy Airspace and all these other ones, and now it's a whole different ballgame where $5 million doesn't work for anybody.
Buys a jet.
So
buys a nice jet. Yeah.
So that's an interesting problem.
It is. It's a very fascinating problem because in any other marketplace, I don't think this gets the funding that this is received right now. In the automotive world, I don't think you'd see it. I don't think you'd see it in many other types of sort of consumer product industries. I don't think you would see the investment. I think COVID has helped. There's been a lot of money sidelined, and there's been a lot of money that's just been waiting to invest in something cool. And so here you go. A lot of the companies are based in Silicon Valley because there's a lot of cash hanging around there. And not in Wichita, which doesn't seem to have, or Dallas or wherever, it doesn't seem to have those kind of investors sitting around willing to do that. So you got this really unique time frame space, but the connection to the consumer market hasn't quite gelled yet. So we have a little more fallout here still, I think. Another couple of months of trying to figure this out.
Well, and speaking of investment, Fidelity and Amazon have backed Beta Technologies, which they have a really, I think their design's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. It kind of looks like a helicopter with a big wing, and I don't know what's the technical for those two things on the top. I'm at a loss here.
I'm just calling them booms. Yeah,
booms. Okay,
booms. I guess they're propulsion booms of some sort because that's what they're there for. Yeah. They're only there to provide structural platforms for the motors. That's it.
But Beta is now a unicorn, so they're valued at $1.4 billion with this new funding round, and it seems like
makes sense?
Amazon. Well, if you have a lot of money in the bank account, you're valued at least that money, so they've got a lot of cash.
Oh yeah, but they always had that weird multiple to it. Like, oh, I get it, it's worth whatever the money they have in the bank is, but then where's the multiple come from, and what's the track record to bank that multiple? Because is the next round of investment on that multiple? Ooh,
yeah, that's a good question.
Well, yeah, the thing about Beta, which is, I think all of them are, all of these aircraft companies are in non-standard aviation manufacturing centers, is that you're going to have to build a lot of infrastructure. And so some of that $400 million is going to go into buildings and infrastructure and tooling and blah, 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 all the boring stuff that costs a lot of money. You're going to be pouring some part of that in there. And I don't know if $400 million is going to do it. It doesn't feel like it. And a lot of aircraft programs have been $500 million to $1 billion, and it seems like they're a little short yet. Now, they may be taking a more cautious approach at Beta, which it does seem to be the case, by the way. They seem to have a well-thought-out plan. The question is, how fast is that cash burn, and can you get through certification with that level of funding? I don't think so. It's going to be close. So it's going to be really interesting to watch because there's so much need for so much cash. Your investors are going to be really limited, I think, unless you start looking, like a lot of companies, start looking overseas. And there's been a lot of Chinese investment, specifically Chinese investment in American aviation companies for a number of years. That's where they go when they sort of run out of cash, or they're desperate for cash. They tend up with Chinese owners. We'll see.
Well, and with Beta, they've had, we reported on this a couple weeks ago that they had the big order with UPS, and they have a good order with United Therapeutics to carry organs for transplant, and the U.S. Air Force Agility Prime program. So they're one of the few who have a lot of potential, buyers for these planes. They have these orders. So that's it's a big piece of it.
Did you read the story that came out of Vermont talking about the different investors they have? And there's a lot that the investors can do to drag in potential customers. It's sort of a who you know network. That's a limited. It's like on the yacht end of boating, right? It's sort of who you know. You have to be in that circle of people who have the cash to fund these things. And I think they're doing a good job of connecting dots between investors and operators. They seem to be doing the right sort of social interactions, meet and greets that must be part of their plan, and it seems to be paying off for them because they have they fully invested in that first real seed of funding. But boy, you still got a long way to go.
Yeah, well, and it's funny how just like in a Kentucky Derby, until you're really down the home stretch, you just don't really know. I mean, it seemed like Joby was the big player just a couple months ago, right? The darling. And now Beta's got 3 big orders and got a lot of good backers. It's just interesting how they're suddenly really vaulting towards the front.
Sways.
So it's changed a lot, even just in a handful of months, half a year. So we'll see what happens.
It will change aviation for the next 20 years if they can sell some airplanes. It will totally do that.
Well, that's it for today's episode of the Struck Aerospace Engineering Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you're listening. And obviously, we're on YouTube as well with video versions. We'll see you here next week on the Struck Podcast. Strike Tape, WeatherGuard Lightning Tech's proprietary lightning protection for radomes, provides unmatched durability for years to come. If you need help with your radome lightning protection, reach out to us at weatherguardaero.com. That's weatherguardaero.com.